topic here is immigration and political thinking on slavery. We're going to first start out with the required terms. These are the terms and names of people you want to be familiar with at the end of this particular class. As you encounter documents for this class that are in the slideshow, you want to define or summarize the document and determine the possible significance. For this class, there will be a series of tasks that are outlined in an orange box. And that's the task for today. The first task is to analyze this document. You also want to define immigration, debate the strategy, and focus on the pros and cons. Lastly, you want to determine if this solution is on the left or right. And for the most part, without giving too much analysis in this document, it's about a solution that requires Africans to leave the United States. And in this case, they're trying to argue that Mexico would be the better option here as opposed to slavery. As they mention right here, that their children will be made free eventually, which would mean they will no longer be subjected to permanent involuntary hereditary servitude. On this slide, we see more highlighted terms and names. We already addressed the abolitionist cause, the support for building new communities outside of the United States, which is a reversal of the chart that we looked at prior, where Africans were leaving Africa and going to the Americas. But for the most part, the immigrationists identified areas outside of America, even going as far as West Africa. And we already established that Sierra Leone is a place of interest. As we look at some of the abolitionists, we're starting to see new ideas emerge. New idea number one, let's just, give up and let's leave and let's try to establish our own communities on our own, as well as the Black nationalist origins. So here we see the story of Paul Kufi. And we want to look at the pros and cons. Here's some basic information on his life. Keep in mind, he's born free. And what he's trying to do is take Africans to Sierra Leone. So you want to determine what are the pros and cons of this particular strategy. Is this going to solve the problem? Keep in mind that there is already an established British settlement in Sierra Leone, which is why this particular location is being selected. Now going to look at another option here, which is proposed by Martin Delaney, and he's one of the first to advocate for Black nationalism. So what I did here is I just Googled definition, provided an additional definition. What you want to do is make sure you have an understanding of the definition, debate the pros and cons of this strategy, and determine if this would be on the political left or political right. Now we're going to look at this particular source here. And again, I'm not going to give away too much. You need to figure out how to analyze these documents on some level on your own. First thing I want to recognize is the use of the word bondsman, which shows up throughout this particular source here. And a bondsman is introducing a debate about slavery versus a bondsman, whereas a bondsman means that this is a result of a law. So the law is what makes you a bondsman. We start off with this particular document. The United States, untrue to her trust and faith, unfaithful to her professed principles. So they're going right back to the Declaration of Independence, the ideals that the revolution was founded on. And then they look at some of these other issues down here, where it's suggesting that the bondsman is disenfranchised. He's denied all civil, religious, social privileges. And what they're trying to do here is just outline all of the, rights denied. These are rights that are being denied to the bondsman. And then down here is a solution. And the solution is to become politically active to try to change your situation. We had become politicians. We mean to understand the political economy and domestic policy of nations, that we had become as well as moral theorists. And on this page here, again, the comparison of the slave and the bondsman, like the slave saying something becomes because his so-called master said it and saying just what he told him to say. This is the relationship between the slave and the slave master, whereas the bondsman is more about the bondsman and the law. And they list a series of prior examples of leadership. As we transition to this particular portion of the document, we see once again the use of the term, trying to establish those communities outside. Here they're looking at the British province of North America. They mention here that there was an establishment and an erection of a college. Why does the college matter? The college matters because when you get down here in the document, they're looking at the type of skills and tasks that the African slave would be in a position to know or possibly learn. And the question here is, what role will education play? If you are going to be doing some of the tasks that are mentioned here, well, how is that going to help elevate your status, especially considering in the prior slide, he was talking about becoming politically active. On this slide, we see comparisons to other groups, as he mentions here, the Jewish people. And here he talks about oppressed people in general. He's trying to make that connection about some of the similarities between oppressed groups, but he's also using the word class. He definitely seems to be concerned throughout the entirety of this document about social class, and this is where you're going to start to see the lines blur between race and class. This section here looks at the American Revolution, and the point that the author here is trying to make is that there's a goal to have a desired class. As he mentions up here, talks about other groups of people, but there might be a potential problem, as he mentions here. Men as Benjamin Franklin, the printer, Roger Sherman, the cobbler, tinkers, and others, signers of the Declaration of Independence, they were determined to have a subservient class. After you're done analyzing that particular source, what you want to do is complete the tasks that are in the orange box. And again, we want to determine the pros and cons of the document, the strategy of black nationalism. And then we transition back to the fugitive slave law, the fugitive slave law that we have addressed a couple of times already, which is about returning property if the property is found in a free state. Here we are transitioning to a different document by Frederick Douglass, who first starts out with the 4 million enslaved countrymen. Notice how he's using the word countrymen. Meanwhile, the people of the South will not use such a term because remember that these individuals are property. Brings up a couple of examples of what it was like to be a slave in this section. And then he transitions to this argument here, where he's looking at the people who are against emancipation. So here he's talking about freedom, and then he writes, they tell us it's a wild, delusive idea. The price of human flesh was never higher than now. Slavery was never more closely entwined about the hearts and affections of the Southern people than now. We're talking here about the love for the institution of slavery, and we'll see why that matters when we transition to the Southern way of thinking. As we look further into the document, Frederick Douglass brings up a couple of other points. As I mentioned before, in the prior slide, he was talking about the support for slavery, and he continues on with that theme, especially down here. They are organized, and yet were not all the pains of creating their organization. Here he talks about the state government, where the system of slavery exists, are complete slave organizations. That's a pretty strong accusation to argue that the state is a slave organization, but it makes sense if there are laws and there are people within the political system who are trying to maintain the institution of slavery. And here we have three emerging ideas for the 1850s period. We have the immigrationists, the anti, and then the black nationalists. This is the task you want to complete. And then, of course, we have some other solutions, and I would like to know which side are you on. Some of the other solutions include radical resistance, moral suasion, and these two are at odds. And really what's going on here is we're looking at the extremes. If we have the people on the left and the people on the right, usually the ones that are concerned about radical resistance are more preservationists, and you would find them on the right. But we're starting to see these ideas develop as far as trying to abolish slavery or to change the circumstances of the slave. We're now going to transition to a piece by David Walker. This appeal by David Walker, another document, is a good example of the moral suasion strategy. And when you're using this strategy, unlike the radical resistance, you're trying to appeal to the good nature. As he mentions here, I appeal to heaven for my motive in writing. Here he is asking every man who has a heart and is blessed with the privilege of believing. So we definitely have two different strategies here. We have the radicals, and then of course we have this other methodology or solution, this moral suasion. And I would like to know, which side are you? Do you think that the radical is going to get things done and be successful at seeking change, or do you just appeal to the system or the people that you are fighting against? So as you look through the remaining portion of this source, what I want you to focus on here is, how is the author, David Walker, trying to appeal to the people he's trying to obtain change from, which is very different from him just saying, we're going to initiate some sort of rebellion and just overthrow you by force. How is he trying to appeal to the good nature? This document by title is a little different. As it mentions here, it is an address to the slaves of the United States. He's not making a speech. He's not writing this for politicians. This is directly to the slave. As we look at this particular document, he talks about brethren and fellow citizen of the North, East, and West. He's trying to appeal to everybody. Many of you are bound to us not only by the ties of a common humanity, we are connected by more tender relations of parents, wives, husbands, children. So he's trying to appeal to the commonalities among the group. And he's recognizing that slavery has a deep gulf between you and us. So let's see where he goes with this. As we look further into the document, we see the author using your grievances. Remember, he is speaking to the slave population, and he's saying that your grievances are many. He's not trying to present to the world a catalog of this nation's sins. He's not trying to say this is what they're doing. Remember, his audience is this population here. They already know what this particular experience is about. What I want you to do as you read the remainder of this particular document is try to make a comparison between the moral suasion. Is he trying to convince people, trying to appeal to their good nature? I mean, he obviously cannot, because the slaves are in no position whatsoever to change the circumstances that the author is arguing for. So as you read this particular source, what you want to try to figure out is, what is the strategy that he's using? So just to recap, we have Paul Kufi, whose argument was, let's just go back to Africa. We have the black nationalist strategist, moral suasion, and of course the individual who tried to rally the slaves or try to give them some form of collective consciousness about their circumstances. And you want to think about these questions here. Which type of person are you? That is going to determine which of the following you would follow. And then you want to continue with these particular questions. At the end, you want to be able to define these terms, the ideas of these leaders. Hopefully you have completed the source chart. And as for the terms, here are the definitions and answers.